This is a Hog Sports Network podcast. You're listening to the Whole Hog Football Podcast, bringing you the latest news, analysis, and more. Here's your host, Matt Jones, with Scotty Bordelon of the Hog Sports Network and WholeHogSports.com.
Arkansas and LSU Saturday night, 6 o'clock kickoff on ESPN. The Razorbacks, of course, coming off the loss to BYU last week, a chance to maybe get right. You know, the LSU series is one that has always kind of defied the talent levels of both of these two teams. There have been a lot of Arkansas teams that didn't seem like they should be playing with LSU, and yet they do. Every time it seems like these two teams get together, or most of the times as they get together, it's always a competitive game. LSU, very talented this year. They've got national championship aspirations, certainly conference and division championship goals. Arkansas, more modest goals for this team. I think, the sky's the limit for any team, but I think Arkansas knows that they're not quite at that level yet. But anytime Arkansas and LSU gets together, you expect a good game, and so it'll be interesting to see how it happens Saturday night. LSU highly favored to win this game, but again, like I said, these games just don't always seem like they go the way you think they're going to go. Matt Jones with Scotty Bordelon and Ethan Westerman, and you look at the Golden Boot history. 1997, I think, was the first year that they played for the Boot. They played 27 times for this trophy. LSU's won 18. Arkansas has won 9, but 14 of those 27 matchups, Scotty, have been one-possession ball games, including the last 3. Every game that Sam Pittman has coached as a head coach for Arkansas in this series has been decided by field goal, field goal, field goal. And so it makes you wonder, do you get something kind of weird again Saturday night in Death Valley?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think you wrote in the keys that these games don't always, kind of go how they look on paper. And the more talented team doesn't always just run away with it. I mean, there was the game in 2019 where LSU was obviously far superiorly talented and blew Arkansas out of the water. That LSU team beat the hell out of everybody, though, for the most part. But, you mentioned, games not always going on, as they, you think they might go on paper. I go back to like the 2012 and the 2013 games. When I was in school, those were, in 2012, LSU was 8th in the country. Arkansas played them to a touchdown at home. And then 2013, LSU's top 15 and Arkansas played them really close. That was the 2013 season was tough.
Well, LSU threw a long touchdown pass in the last minute to win that game.
Yeah, I mean, I think Arkansas's just got a way of kind of focusing in, when they kind of know that their backs are against the wall. I mean, I think we've seen plenty of teams, throughout this series just kind of hone in and, make it a competitive game when, maybe the point spread or, all the talking heads are predicting a route in one way or another. And the last 3 games in this series have been really good, all decided by 3 points. Got an overtime game in there. Arkansas won on the road, and LSU's won the last 2 in Fayetteville. So it's been kind of a neat series of late. And I think what I'm looking forward to maybe more than anything this weekend is we finally get that Jaden Daniels, KJ Jefferson matchup that I think we all wanted last year. Would have made that game potentially, even more interesting than it already was.
Yeah, Arkansas, I thought they were going to get blown off the field by LSU last year, and for them to keep that game so close was, it was surprising. I think that Arkansas kept that game so close last season. Ethan, you wrote the scouting report this week on LSU. Just tell us some about what you've seen from them through these first 3 games. And just to recap for everybody, they lose their first game big to Florida State. They come back and they beat Grambling State big in week 2, like you'd expect them to do. And then they get a blowout victory last week in Starkville.
Yeah, maybe from like an exception of the second half against Florida State, and then also early in that game they had some trouble scoring around the goal line against Florida State. I think the LSU offense is kind of what you expected coming into this year. They're really dynamic. They lead the SEC in yards per game. I think they're number 3 in passing yards, number 3 in rushing yards. They're pretty and then they got Jaden Daniels, who he's just pretty dynamic. They're about what you expected on offense. They got Malik Neighbors, their preseason All-American receiver. He's leading I know leading the SEC in receiving yards right now. He's probably near the top of the nation after what he did last week to Mississippi State. He's a playmaker. So offense right now, I mean, that's not really, I don't think, what LSU fans are concerned about. That's looked fine. It's really been their secondary that has, you know, that's led to their loss in week 1. Florida State torched them in the second half through the air. Grambling State even had some success. I know that was a blowout, but they even had some success passing against LSU. But then last week was, that dominant win over Mississippi State. That was kind of the performance that you look at and you say, hey, did they figure things out through 3 weeks? They have. I know Scotty's big into PFF grades. I've started kind of enjoying looking at those too. They have the second worst pass coverage grade in the SEC. It's near the bottom of the nation. And then they have like the 5th worst tackling grade in the nation. So you wonder if that's going to come into play, especially with, you got KJ Jefferson, if he gets going running the ball at all. If they're not very good at tackling, he's not an easy guy to bring down. So yeah, for them right now, it's kind of, their offense is probably where you want it to be. If they can shore up, some tackling and get better in pass coverage, they probably stand right now. I mean, it's a really wild SEC West. I don't remember this time any other year that I've just kind of felt this way of, I don't know who could win it.
Mm.
If they fix their defense, though, I think that they kind of have to at this point maybe be the favorite still.
Daniels is the player you watch on offense. You mentioned Neighbors, Mason Taylor, a really good pro prospect at tight end. And then on defense, the player's Harold Perkins. We were just all watching that game last year with our jaws on the table. The way he dominated, he looked like Micah Parsons running around in purple and gold, Scotty, but he hasn't been quite off to the level that he was at last year through 3 games.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I looked at CFB stats. He's got 10 tackles through 3 games. While the tackle number might be quite a bit lower than you might suspect, he's got 3 pass breakups. I mean, that's kind of impressive. It tells you he's, at least somewhere around the ball, fairly often at least. But yeah, Sam Pittman was saying that, he went back on Monday and watched the game from last year, and he just knows that, how fast Perkins is. Like, I think he mentioned that, a guy's fast when he's running Malik Hornsby down multiple times, and it didn't matter at all to Perkins last year who the quarterback was. He got to Malik Hornsby. He strip sacked Cade Fortin on the final play of the game for Arkansas. Yeah, he's just last year at least he was a game wrecker. Haven't really seen a whole lot of that this year. Sam was saying that it looks like, they've made some kind of tweaks to their defense under Matt House in his second year, and he's not quite, as great of a pass rusher, maybe, in terms of volume and chances to get to the quarterback as last year, but he's been a pretty sure tackler, and his pass rush grade for the opportunities that he's gotten, they're pretty good. Arkansas has been using freshman linebacker Alex Sanford as the I guess he's been acting as Harold Perkins in practice. Sam said he's been giving him a pretty good look, but there's no way really to unless you get Harold Perkins for a couple of days, you borrow him. You can't simulate the talent and the speed and the ability to cover ground and the physicality and all that. It's a guy that's really, really tough to prepare for. I would imagine that Alex is doing all he can, but I think he's got a bright future too. But I don't know. I think it's a nod to Alex that they think that he's the closest thing that they can get to Harold Perkins. But yeah, there's no way to simulate a talent like that during the week.
I think they're using Perkins more as a middle linebacker this year, whereas last year they used him in more of a roving manner, an outside linebacker, defensive end type. Ethan.
They've kind of been experimenting, just trying to see where he's most effective at, kind of moving him back around the edges. I just won't forget last year though, how much in that game I don't remember a game that I've walked away saying that much like a defensive player was just the total, like he was the player of the game, like by and away, far and away. There wasn't much room for like anybody else to kind of be the MVP of that game, just the way that he completely affected everything Arkansas was trying to do. And then I won't forget going into Brian Kelly's post game, and he tells everybody that Perkins had like the flu or something. At least he said flu-like symptoms, I remember, and that he had been vomiting before the game. So that was one of those games that I don't know. My respect for Harold Perkins grew so much after that game, just because I hadn't seen a defensive player dominate at that level in quite a while.
I just thought that game last year showed how much Arkansas needed KJ Jefferson on the field. And, I think we all are in agreement that Arkansas's got a better number 2 quarterback now than they had this time last year. But there's such a drop off with this offense when Jefferson either is not playing or he's not healthy. And I mean, Pittman acknowledged this week that Jefferson was playing banged up some against BYU the other day. And I think everybody saw it with their own eyes. The plays giving himself up on the sideline when he's one-on-one with a cornerback 10, 15 yards away from the end zone. You don't see him give himself up like that. Made some, underthrows that were kind of uncharacteristic of him. And so, how healthy is Jefferson this week? Because, this is the type of game where you need KJ to be KJ to steal a line from Scotty. You got to have him playing his best ball against LSU because hey, let's face it, the chips are stacked against Arkansas right now. And the way that you kind of offset some of that is by having your best player go out and just ball out. And I think that's what they've got to have KJ Jefferson do this week. And I think it begins, Scotty, with him being healthy.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see, just how Arkansas chooses to use KJ. Like, are they going to, throw more designed quarterback runs his way and just, I don't know. I expected that, a lot more last week, and I don't know, exactly what the extent of his injury is if he's got one. We all obviously know he's banged up. But this is far and away going to be the most physical defense that he's faced. So I'm wondering, if he does get more designed runs, is it going to be another week where we see him kind of, duck out of bounds when he's close to the sideline instead of, taking that body blow and that contact? Because obviously he does give them the best chance to win a game. And, I thought KJ, I don't know if it was necessarily his coming out party. I think in 2021 when Arkansas won down in Baton Rouge, but KJ had a pretty good day. He managed the game pretty well. I don't think he hurt Arkansas offensively with turnovers and that kind of thing. So he's got to be, he's on his game. I think he's got to be multidimensional, obviously, and he's got to play clean. Like the pick that he threw last week was, severely underthrown. And then, I think he's got to I think he's just got to be aware that there's going to be a pass rush on him and there's going to be heat on him in the pocket. LSU's defensive line's really talented. I think Mekhi Wingo, I think he might be up there as one of the best defensive linemen in the league. In a league that is kind of known for monsters on the defensive line. And so he's got to be aware of Perkins. He's got to be aware of a bunch of defensive linemen coming at him. I think whenever he does feel heat, he's got to be strong with the ball in his hands, and not, potentially give LSU some additional momentum and, with the turnover potentially. I think he's got to be really, really sure with the ball in his hands this week.
One of the things we talked about earlier this week was how Pittman is not going to just sit back and let the status quo hurt the team. They're going to be proactive. They're going to do something. We talked about maybe the change should be at center. Maybe you move Bo Limmer back to guard where he's been dominant. Of course, we don't see practice. We don't know what Amari Wiggins looks like behind him. Maybe the line is better off having Limmer play center and maybe moving some people around at the other positions. One of the things they're going to do this week that Pittman has said since we talked about that is they're going to roll the pocket. They're going to kick KJ Jefferson on the run. I think that they've kind of figured out that sitting there and blocking in maybe a traditional pass pro for Jefferson just isn't working. And so they're going to roll the pocket. They're going to move KJ this week. And I almost feel like that can be beneficial for Arkansas because it gets KJ out on the run. I almost feel like he's been, boxed in a little bit too much these first 3 games. We know they didn't want him running the first 2 games. Obviously that changed at halftime of the Kent State game. He's banged up last week against BYU. If he's healthy and he's out on the run, I just feel like that gives you a playmaking dynamic that maybe they haven't had the first 3 games with him on the run. It takes away half your field. You're not going to have him throwing back across the field 40 yards. If he's rolling to his right, he's not going to be thrown back to the left. But what I think it does is it gets him on the move. It gives you more of that dual threat dynamic that has always made KJ Jefferson so good. And so I don't know that we're going to see the same offense this week that we've seen in any of the past 3 weeks, at least not from a passing standpoint. And I think the ability for him to get out on the move also maybe opens up your run game.
Yeah, I think one thing it does too is it makes the defense react to you instead of you just sitting in the pocket and you reacting to, potentially a pass rusher coming right at you. And you're right, you can roll KJ out either way. And if he doesn't like what he sees and he thinks he's got an advantage, he can go after, then he might tuck it and run. What it also might do is, you roll him a couple times and then, you may be able to roll him a little bit to one side, and then you may be able to just kind of come across your body and hand the ball off to a tailback flowing, kind of against the grain. I think BYU did that a few times in the run game last week, and I think they had some solid success with it. Yeah, I think it's about making the defense react to you instead of you just kind of standing still, so to speak. What the rollout does too is it kind of takes, if you're rolling left, it kind of takes the defensive end on the other side of the field out of the play, and you only have to, I guess, 2 or 3 of your offensive linemen really have to win their blocks, or a tight end has to win his block. It kind of takes a couple players potentially out of the game, and ideally one of those players would be Harold Perkins. So I'm going to be kind of curious to see if they maybe try to flow plays away from him.
Arkansas has been piping noise in this week at practice. They're trying to get them ready for the crowd noise they're going to face down at LSU. I think one of the things we mentioned the other day is that LSU hasn't had that big home game yet this year. Their only home game to this point was against Grambling, and so being an SEC game, even if Arkansas is coming off a loss, it's a night game. It's going to be a big game. You got Fowler and Herbstreit are going to be calling this on ESPN in prime time. This is under the lights at Death Valley. This is when they really show off. Have either of you been to a game at LSU, by the way?
Yeah, I went. I'm trying to remember what game it was I went to. Arkansas won down there. I think it was in 2015 when Arkansas won by 17. Yeah, it was a night game down there.
Mm-hmm.
But Arkansas pretty much quieted that crowd. It was a pretty impressive game.
Yep. I've been to a lot of.
I haven't been down there for a football game. I went for the basketball game this past year, which was pretty that was an underwhelming game for Arkansas, but I saw Tiger Stadium for the first time. I saw, how they keep Mike the Tiger, on campus.
In his habitat.
That was kind of cool. Yeah. So I saw him and I saw the football stadium, but I have never been to a football game at Death Valley.
There are other stadiums. I've been to a lot of games in Baton Rouge for football. There's a lot of stadiums in the SEC that I think can compare with LSU in noise level. I think Kyle Field's up there. I would put Sanford Stadium at Georgia. I'd put the Swamp up there. I'd put Neyland when Tennessee's teams are good. Maybe even Auburn. Auburn, I think, is a little bit of an underrated venue. But what makes Tiger Stadium, I think, so intimidating is just the entire experience. You roll in. It's quite possible you're going to get your buses rocked on the way to the stadium. Houston Nutt used to tell his team to put their helmets on when they would get off the bus because you didn't know if they were going to be throwing things at you as you were going into your locker room. You get out there, it's humid, it's hot, there's smell of booze in the air. And then, you kind of add the crowd noise up on top of that. And it kind of overwhelms your senses, to be honest with you. And there's just nothing else like it. And so, I mentioned they've been trying to pipe in crowd noise all week in practice, to the point that Pittman said this week that he's had a headache for several days. And that on Tuesday, he actually moved away from the offense where they're piping in all the noise and went and watched the defense for a while. There's just nothing like when you actually get out there and experience that atmosphere in Baton Rouge. And I think the first 5-10, maybe first quarter, 5-10 minutes, first quarter, that's going to tell us a lot about how Arkansas is going to handle this Saturday night, because there are a lot of teams that have gone in there and the game gets away from them in the first quarter and you can't get it back. And so I think this first quarter is going to be a real big test to see how does Arkansas handle everything that's thrown at them, because I don't know that these players, even the ones who went to LSU 2 years ago, they're at the back end of a season where they're wanting Coach Orgeron fired. That's not a normal Death Valley crowd that Arkansas won in front of 2 years ago in 2021. I don't know that a lot of these players, maybe aside from the Landon Jacksons and the Nudie McLaughlin who used to play there at LSU, have really ever experienced anything like they're going to see on Saturday night.
I think that if you watch that Mississippi State game this past week, the LSU went into a hostile environment, and they on offense they just had so many big plays early. Especially Malik Neighbors came down with some big grabs that they took a crowd out of the game right away. And it's like if they have that type of success against Arkansas this week early in the game, that place is going to be absolutely rocking. And Arkansas would like probably nothing more than to take one out of LSU's playbook and do what they did at Mississippi State, maybe hit them for a couple big plays early and just quiet them up a little bit. But yeah, no, Mississippi State, it felt like they had been defeated 8 minutes into that game, just the way that LSU just kept on hitting them. I think that Arkansas really has to, on defense, keep great contain of Jaden Daniels. And honestly, the Arkansas defensive line, I think, is still something that a lot of people feel pretty good about. If they can get in the backfield and let him and maybe come up with a few sacks early, I think that could bode really well for him to kind of take the crowd out of the game there.
Yeah, Sam was right about, the crowd noise being, or whatever it was that they were playing at practice was being awful. It was whatever, a crowd sounds like when they're rowdy. And then it also sounded like on top of that, they laid like a track of kids locked in a room screaming on top of that crowd noise. It was brutal. And if I'd stayed longer than 15 or 20 minutes, I probably would have had a headache too. Obviously going into this environment, it's not ideal. Based on, Arkansas had 14 penalties. They had 10 penalties on offense last week. I think, Matt, you wrote this in the keys, in a friendly environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that, I could be wrong here. Maybe my memory's slipping, but I don't know that Arkansas will have gone into an environment like this since they went to Georgia a couple of seasons ago.
That's probably right.
And man, we remember how that game started. What was it? 2 false starts just right off the bat. And, and then KJ's like taking a snap on 1st and 20 with his heels on the goal line. And it's everything it gets to a certain point, especially in that Georgia game, where it's just like, can you get the ball snapped? And we'll try to figure it out once the ball is snapped. LSU's fans are going to be riled up for this game, I think, not because it's Arkansas coming in necessarily, but they feel really good about the way that their teams bounce back after a disappointing loss in week 1. They put up some gaudy numbers in the last 2 weeks. You go win your conference opener on the road, there's going to be a lot of excitement there. And yeah, it's going to take, this inexperienced line finding a way to compose themselves, communicate effectively. And yeah, I think you're right. Like the first few minutes are going to tell you a lot, but you've got to sustain that focus that you've got at the beginning of the game throughout the game, because it's not like it's going to get quiet really at any point unless you're just, throwing haymakers throughout the game.
Maybe Mississippi State last year would compare from a crowd noise perspective, because you got the cowbells that are the great equalizer there. Arkansas struggled with penalties in that game. So this has not been a team under Pittman that has really handled crowd noise very well. It'll be interesting to see how they do this weekend down in Baton Rouge. The Whole Hog Football Podcast is sponsored by Kindle King, design, display, signage, KindleKing.com. That's KENDALKING.com.
The Kindle King Group family of companies plays to win, just like our hogs. We know how demanding retail marketing is today. From digital omnichannel creative services, through in-store signing and displays, and finally to social influence, we've got you covered. Our KKG Inc. family of companies, Kindle King, Shopcart Creative, and Soapbox Influence are winning with multiple retailers and brands. We play to win, and we'll be a winning partner for all your retail marketing service needs. Go Hogs!
Arkansas LSU is one of the noteworthy games in the SEC this week. We're starting to get into that portion of the season where you get a lot more SEC versus SEC games. In fact, I think next week when Arkansas takes on Texas A&M down in Arlington, all 7 games in the conference are going to be conference matchups. It'll be the first time that's happened this year. But you got a lot of conference versus conference matchups this week. We're not going to pick any of these non-conference games, but we'll run through them real quick. You've got Texas San Antonio at Tennessee this week. That's kind of an interesting game, 3 o'clock on SEC Network. UTSA, of course, coached by Jeff Traylor, the former Razorback assistant coach, who had some very interesting comments last week after one of their games, I think when they played Army. You might want to go look those up. Charlotte goes to Florida. It's in the Swamp this week. Of course, Florida had the big win last week over Tennessee. Well, that's a 6 o'clock kickoff. It's going to be on SEC Network Plus and ESPN Plus. Georgia is going to be home on Saturday night, taking on Alabama Birmingham. Trent Dilfer, the Blazers head coach, bringing his team in there. They're 1-2. They're probably going to get blown out of the water. And then kind of an interesting game, I think. This game's going to be played in St. Louis. Memphis is going to Missouri. Memphis, pretty good mid-major team. Missouri, I know they beat Kansas State last week, but they were shaky the week before against Middle Tennessee. Going to be interesting to see how that one goes. It's going to be a 6:30 kickoff on ESPNU. Let's get to SEC games now. Auburn goes to Texas A&M Saturday morning. It's an 11 o'clock kick. It'll be on ESPN. Scotty, what do you got?
Yeah, I don't really know. These are 2 teams that I can't seem to really figure out. I think I'm going to go with Texas A&M simply because they're at home. But I think, like Sam Pittman has said before, like the ideal time to catch a game on the road, right, is early in the morning. So I think Auburn will probably be competitive, but I'll give the edge to Texas A&M at home.
Yeah, I like Texas A&M as well. I think that they honestly, Connor Wegman, I think I said his last name right, Wegman. I think it's Wegman. He's been one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC so far, kind of quietly. I think that Miami loss maybe took a lot of eyes away from watching them much more, but they got a pretty sneaky good offense right now. I think that they kind of have their quarterback spot figured out a little bit better than Auburn right now. And I think whenever you're playing, that first SEC game and you're at home, probably quarterback play will play a big part into that. So I like A&M.
Yeah, I think one more thing. I think with Auburn's passing game, Peyton Thorne has been their guy through 3 weeks. He's got 3 touchdowns, 3 picks the last 2 weeks. He threw 2 interceptions against Samford. So if Auburn wants to have a chance to compete in that game, he's got to protect the ball a lot better than he did last week.
I like Texas A&M for one of the reasons that Scotty said they're at home, but I also think they're more challenged to this point in the year. They played Miami in Miami 2 weeks ago. Auburn's big test at this point was going up and playing at Cal Berkeley. They didn't really play great that night. They came away with a kind of a tight win when Cal Berkeley left a lot of points on the field. I think A&M will have Auburn's number, and I think that Hugh Freeze will get his first loss as Auburn's coach. Another game at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. This will be an SEC Network, 11 o'clock kickoff. Kentucky goes to Vanderbilt. Commodores already playing their 5th game of the season.
Yeah, I think Vanderbilt is interesting. I kind of like some of the playmakers that they have, especially at receiver. But I think Kentucky's got enough talent. They'll be able to go into what should probably be a really, really raucous environment at Vanderbilt. I think Kentucky's somewhere around like a 13 or a 14 point favorite. I think by the end of that game, I think they'll probably have that spread covered.
I don't know who to pick in this one, to be honest. I'm not very sold on Kentucky at all. I think some of their scores this year, are a little bit deceiving. They opened with Ball State and ended up winning that one by 30 points, but that was actually pretty close for a lot of the game. Eastern Kentucky, they played week 2. That ended up being an 11-point game, which, fun fact, that Eastern Kentucky team, Western Carolina beat last week, who Arkansas played in the opener. I'm not sold on Kentucky. I don't think Vandy's very good either. But I do think they've been through a little bit at this point to where they're maybe going to be playing a little freely. I don't know. I'm picking Vandy. I don't know why, but I am.
That stadium at Vanderbilt, I was over there in Nashville earlier this year for the Arkansas baseball series, at Vanderbilt. They're missing 2 end zones. It's a total construction project right now. They're actually going to modernize that stadium and make it look quite a bit nicer than it has. I think it's the first time that it's been touched in something like 40 years. So not that Vanderbilt ever has a great home field advantage, but maybe it prevents more Kentucky people from coming down. I don't know. Maybe they'll play basketball over next door at Memorial Gym. 2 things that come out that stand out to me. Vanderbilt, I don't think is very good defensively. I think Kentucky is really good defensively, or at least that's kind of been their MO under Mark Stoops. And one of the really interesting things I think in this game is that Kentucky went into the transfer portal last year and got Vanderbilt's leading rusher. Ray Davis goes back to Nashville this week. He ran for 1,042 yards last year for Vanderbilt. I think that he has a big game against his old teammates, and I think Kentucky will go into Nashville and get that victory on Saturday morning. The big game in the SEC this week, of course, it's the 2:30 kickoff on CBS. Ole Miss goes to Alabama. You've seen Lane Kiffin already playing mind games this week with Nick Saban, talking about they've got spies in the Tuscaloosa building who are telling them that their defensive coordinator isn't the one who's really calling the plays. You know what this is. This is, or at least it feels like to me, this is Kiffin just trying to get under Saban's skin, trying to create a little bit of, I don't know what you would call it, confusion, I guess, within Alabama's team building. And, we'll see how it works out. But they go play kind of an angry Alabama team, I would think, after losing 2 weeks ago and not playing very well last week against South Florida.
Yeah, and I'm sure y'all saw it too, but Andy Staples put out a video of like side by side Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin standing at the podium. Their hand gestures are the same. They're doing the same thing, or they're both talking with their hands at times, and it was pretty funny. I think, I do think Kiffin.
I think that's intentional too.
Yeah, I think he's definitely playing some mind games with Alabama, but I think Nick Saban's kind of got. I think he probably got his team's attention after losing a national like primetime game at home, and then you go out the next week and you just kind of stink on offense against South Florida. But the defense, I think, took a step forward, and Jalen Milroe's back as their starter. I think that's probably a confidence boost for him. I do think he's the guy. Probably gives him the best chance to win. So if he goes out and plays fairly clean, I think his defense will, be able to make enough plays for Alabama to win at home.
I feel like this one could really go either way, just because Alabama, we just don't know what to expect at this point. Between last week them playing the other 2 quarterbacks and not looking very good, but having Milroe back, I think will be big for them. I thought he didn't play all too terrible against Texas, and maybe it was just a knee-jerk reaction. That fan base was not happy with him after that game at all. But I think that he gives them the best chance to win. But at this point, I think I like Ole Miss more. Jackson Dart, he's been one of the best quarterbacks in the league as well. And so I have them pulling up an upset in Bryant-Denny Stadium.
Well, what's the old saying? Lightning doesn't strike twice in the same spot. I mean, when was the last time Alabama lost 2 games in Tuscaloosa?
I was just about to say that. I don't feel like I remember it happening.
That's my deal. I just don't think they're losing there again this year. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Ole Miss is a better team. 2 things stand out to me. Alabama's got like 18 5-stars on its player. Ole Miss has 1 or on the roster. And then, there's all this talk about Saban and how he does against assistant coaches or his former assistant coaches, and how they're starting to beat him on a regular basis, whether it be Kirby Smart or Jimbo Fisher or Steve Sarkisian this year. I don't think Kiffin's going to do it. I think Alabama wins Saturday afternoon in Tuscaloosa. I don't know how. I just think they win, because I don't think they're losing twice in Tuscaloosa in 2 games. It would be hard to fathom that happens to Alabama. Kind of my rule of thumb for a lot of years is don't pick against Alabama, don't pick against the Patriots. And that serves you pretty well, I think, in predictions. Saturday night, this will kick off 30 minutes after Arkansas LSU. Mississippi State goes to South Carolina. Of course, the Gamecocks had a pretty strong showing last week in Athens. We're leading Georgia at halftime. Of course, Mississippi State coming off that loss to LSU.
Yeah, I don't have a feel for either of these teams either. I feel like I say that every week, but I'll give the edge to South Carolina. I was pretty impressed with, the poise that they showed last week against Georgia. If they can carry that over, I think they've got a really good shot to win this weekend. I'll take them.
I like South Carolina by a lot. I think that last week was kind of a moral win for them, and I don't think that's the easiest place to go in and play if you're Mississippi State after getting beat pretty bad by LSU.
I thought Zach Arnett was a bad hire for Mississippi State after the death of Mike Leach last year. I know it's his first year. He's going to get some grace period. I think he might have one of the hottest seats in the SEC, though, because of what he's trying to replace at Mississippi State. And I don't see it going well for him. Maybe I'm wrong. I just don't see it going well for him. I think South Carolina wins this one big. All right, Arkansas LSU Saturday night. We mentioned at 6 o'clock ESPN. They get the A-team treatment. Chris Fowler, Kirk Herbstreit, Holly Rowe, even ESPN Radio sending in its main ESPN radio announcers to call this game. Razorbacks, a big underdog. Of course, they lost to BYU last week. Everything would suggest that LSU is going to win this game. Scotty, how do you think it goes?
Yeah, I'm taking LSU probably by a few scores. I don't know that Arkansas defensively will be able to come up with enough stops. And I think LSU's defensive line just continues to give Arkansas's front fits.
I'm going to go with LSU as well. I think it's because, kind of the history and how these games have been close. I definitely don't think LSU is going to cover. I don't know what the spread was at last time, but I know it opened at like 18.5 or something. Mm-hmm. I don't think Arkansas has what it takes to go in there and pull off an upset, but I do think it's maybe a 1 or 2 score game. I think if Arkansas can protect KJ, if the offensive line can step up and give him some time, LSU has shown some trouble in the secondary. So, yeah, I see this one being a little bit closer than maybe some expect, but still a LSU win.
There aren't any moral victories. I mean, you don't get a moral victory in your win-loss column, but I think if Arkansas can go down there and play LSU well, this is a game that even going into the season before the struggles of the last couple of weeks, you didn't think Arkansas was going to go to LSU and win this game, or at least most people did not think that. So if you can go down there, you can play well, you can improve on some of the things that didn't go well last week. I think maybe that gives you some motivation, some confidence going in to this stretch the next few weeks, especially with Texas A&M, that should be a little bit more winnable game next week at a neutral site. So that's what I'm looking for Arkansas. I think LSU wins this. I think that they're just more talented. I think they're a better football team right now. But for Arkansas, can you fix the things that have gone wrong that maybe get you on the right track as the season goes along, and then the schedule gets a little bit more friendly in the back half? Come to WholeHogSports.com this weekend for all of our coverage from Arkansas LSU. We'll be back next week with another podcast to look back at the game and look forward to Arkansas, Texas A&M. For Scotty Bordelon and Ethan Westerman, I'm Matt Jones, and we'll see you next time on the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
The proceeding has been a production of the Hog Sports Network. Look for our daily podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. For more Razorbacks coverage, go to WholeHogSports.com or follow the Hog Sports Network reporters on social media.